Hello, we are at Animal Care Expo Day 2 and let's go through everything. So today we had 2 roundtables and 3 sessions. I only took notes on one roundtable because the other one was kind of like a little bit of a review from yesterday, the architecture one, but also I asked very specific questions to our organization and I just don't feel like it's applicable to many people, so we're gonna skip that one. And then also for the sessions, I only took notes on 2 of them. The last one was a keynote speaker and it was all about like mental health. Not that mental health isn't important, but I just didn't feel the need to take notes on that one. So without further ado, my first roundtable talk was advocacy. I want to start by saying since I come from a legal background, I feel like I have this need to address problems with policy, and something that I learned today is that policy is not everything. The example that we talked about is actually one that I'm seeing right now in real time. So we already have, at least in my city, I know this isn't applicable everywhere, but we already have 1 million spay-neuter programs. We have vaccine and microchip services. Breeding has been illegal since 2021. Anyways, like on paper, we're doing everything right, yet we're still having really big population problems. So with that being said, I was basically asking like, okay, if education is a problem because, the community doesn't, we have all of these services, but the community isn't necessarily utilizing them. So I guess for me, it's like, is it a question of, do people not know about these services or people intentionally not using them? And if we're not using them, why? Like, do we need education on why spay-neuter needs to happen? Do we need education on why we need to vaccinate our pets? Why we need to microchip them? So yeah, I think that's kind of the mindset that I was coming from. Now what I learned, so community outreach and enforcement, like I said, those are kind of the 2 big problems that we're seeing right now when it comes to enforcement. There's, I'll just say, a lot of breeding and a lot of criminal activity happening, and there's videos on the internet about it. Our police department is aware of it, our animal control is aware of it, our city council is aware of it, our mayor is aware of it. So it leads me to wonder, why are we not doing anything about it? So when it comes to enforcement, that's kind of a whole other beast. But we need enforcement alongside the policy. Now, when it comes to community outreach, I kind of just touched on this, but just making sure that we kind of can understand, like, what is the root of the problem? Is it because people don't know that these services exist, or is it because they don't want to get these services done on their pets specifically? The other thing I will say, and again, this is more for communities that don't already have the access to care, but when you're pushing for access to care, you can't just have the policy, you also have to have the funding component with it. So essentially, and I think I've talked about this on my page before, but when you have spay-neuter laws, mandatory spay-neuters, I think a lot of people just assume like that's going to be the fix. Okay, it's illegal to not have your pet spayed neutered after 6 months of age, so they're going to magically start doing it, and that's just not the case. If spay-neuters cost $500 and people don't have $500, like, what can we do to really enforce that? It's just not actually possible. So if we're going to make something a policy, we also need to have the funding available to offer affordable vet care, or any kind of care for that matter. This kind of applies to humans too. So anyways, I think that was my biggest takeaway. If you're already past the point of having access to care, really focus on community outreach and enforcement. And if you're still in the stages of like, we need access to care, then you want to focus on policy and funding. Okay, moving on. So the first class that I took today was Lifesaving in the middle of nowhere. Aside from like one note, honestly, this is applicable to all organizations, not just in the middle of nowhere. I can totally see this working for large cities as well. So just wanted to throw that out there. The number one takeaway that I got from this is that organizations, again, all organizations, not just in the middle of nowhere, we need to move away from enforcement and that mindset and move more towards becoming a community hub. I think a lot of us, especially when we're here on social media, we feel the need to speak out on injustice and certain things that are happening just to bring education to the masses and bring attention to a situation that might be really negative and that needs attention. So I'm not saying we have to stop that, but I think for some viewers, if that's kind of all that they're seeing from us, they kind of feel like we're not safe spaces. Like if they come to us with a dog that's not neutered and is like 6 years old, that we're gonna pass some kind of judgment onto them. But at the same time, we really need to come at this from like a community perspective so that they feel like, oh, this is a safe space, like let me go, let me talk about the resources that they have, maybe they can connect me with a spay neuter program. At least from my perspective, that's really what I do want. Like, of course I'm going to talk about the legal side of things just because of who I am as a person and the background that I have, but at the same time, I do have a lot of resources at my fingertips. If somebody needs a free spay neuter program, or if they need access to vaccines or a microchip or literally whatever they need, I want them to feel safe enough to come to me and ask for those things rather than continue to have their dog not altered or unvaccinated or whatever else. So I think moving away from that enforcement mentality and, like, let's be honest, judgment, and moving just towards being kinder and being more of a community hub for people to feel safe to come to us. I think that's really, really important. So they kind of gave us 5 golden rules to having a successful organization. Number 1 is having business engagement. So when it comes to businesses, they don't just want more customers, they tend to want to do things that actually matter, and they want to build a community. So when you are doing your business engagement, the number 1 thing that they talked about was using ROI language, return on investment. So if you're going to pitch like a coffee shop or a movie theater, just make sure that you're putting it in language that they understand and they know what the bottom line is. They also recommend reaching out to law firms and real estate offices. I can attest to this. They give very good money. Another thing that they had mentioned is you can kind of leverage it if one person donates and the rest don't, or one office donates and the rest don't. I've actually never done this myself, but it's a very good idea. They had mentioned that sometimes if, like, let's say this real estate office donates $2,500, then they'll go to the other real estate offices and be like, hey, do you want to match this? Or even like, hey, do you want to like beat them and donate more than them, and you can get like a bigger plaque or whatever. So anyways, just making sure that you're like using the donations that you do get to leverage it to the full potential. And then also, wherever you spend money, ask for money. They gave the example of feed stores and insurance offices. So when they go to buy 12 bags of dog food, then they will come back 2 weeks later and be like, hey, remember us? Want to donate to our organization? And typically they do. And then for insurance offices, it's kind of the same thing. They'll go in and be like, hey, we bought insurance from you for the next 6 months. Want to make a donation to us? And again, they typically say yes. Wherever you're going to spend money, because usually in rescue situations, you're spending a lot of money at once, go back and ask for it. Moving on to number 2, media. Do anything. If you can do your local paper, you can post in Facebook groups, your TV station, invite radio hosts to your events, whatever you can do to put yourself out there and your organization out there, do it. The one thing that they did say to be careful of, though, is this help us mentality. We're not looking for every single sob story to put out there on these large channels. Sometimes having the good news takes your organization further than continuing to blast all the bad news. So she talked about going from a help us mentality to look at what you helped us do, or look at what you can help us do. That way you're kind of shifting it from like, oh my God, look at the sad dog who's about to die, and kind of shifting it from like, okay, this is where this dog started, but this is where they are now, or this is where they could be if you donate. So just kind of like changing that perspective to like, still it's a negative situation, but finding the positive in it. Number 3, municipal investment. This can be city council, it can be your mayor, anybody who's in charge basically. But the number 1 thing here, if you're going to ask for help, you really need to understand their point of view. So I think the biggest thing is the risk. If they are going to back you, what kind of risks are there with that? Next is public perception. They would probably argue that this is the number 1 issue. If they support you, what is the public going to think about that? And then the last 2, cost and sustainability. So with cost, obviously they need to know how much something's going to cost so that they can take it to their budget meeting and see if it's even feasible. And then sustainability, they just kind of need to know long term. Like if you're trying to do a spay neuter clinic, is this just a one-time thing and we're trying to fit as many dogs as we possibly can? Or is this something that like every quarter we want to do, or every month we want to do? Like what financially, what is the sustainability here? Now, unlike with business engagement where you're talking in return on investment language, we really want to speak in outcomes here. So we're bringing solutions, but then we're also bringing the costs. We want them, like I said, to be able to go to their next budget meeting and have exact numbers that they can try to work into their budget and see if it's possible. It just makes everybody's life easier. So even though sometimes all we get are ranges, as much as you can, try and put like an exact dollar amount on it so that they can see if they can make it happen. Number 4, vet partnership. So typically in their experience and in mine, the easier you make it to say yes, the more often they will. Most vets aren't malicious and they're not out just for the money. Some of them are, but in my experience, most of them actually do want to do good, and they are willing to partner with rescues for a good cause, whether it be a clinic or any other help that we might need. The one thing that they did say though is do not take advantage. I have never done this. I didn't know this was a thing, but they really stressed it, so I'm guessing that a lot of people do it. So emergencies happen, but try your best not to be unpredictable. So they give the example of like health certificates. So they schedule like 20 dogs to go in for health certificates. And then at the last minute, like 5 dogs get added, and they just throw those 5 extra dogs in the van and drive down there. And then they show up to the vet office and like, hey, so can we squeeze these 5 extra dogs in? That's just a big no-no, and it pisses vets off. It gets them off schedule. Usually they're already squeezing you in. At least for us, they're already squeezing us in. So if I try to squeeze more dogs in, it's just gonna throw their whole schedule off, and now I'm creating more work for them and a longer day for them. And when they're already doing us a favor, that's definitely not what we want to do. So as much as you can, in the exception of emergencies, try to be predictable for them. Another thing that they mentioned, and I was unaware of this, so I'm going to have to look into it, but in some states, telehealth is allowed. You do have to establish the relationship in person, but once you do, you can do telehealth moving forward. The closest vet to her is 110 miles away. So she was saying that she actually paid the vet to come to her, check out her facility, meet all the dogs, just kind of establish that rapport. And then moving forward, she did telehealth for the majority of the appointments. Obviously for spay neuters, you still have to go in person, but for any like upper respiratory or stomach issues or like heart guards, stuff like that, she was able to do all of that over the phone. Okay, and last but not least, residents as cheerleaders. I think this is one that I struggle with, but we have to assume good intentions. Most people, you don't have to convince them to help, but they do need like very clear and actionable steps, not just like send us money. Give them something that they can do, give them homework they love to feel like their voice matters. If you're ever having an issue with like city council or whatever, or you have an issue that you want addressed by city council, usually constituents are the best people to bring it forward. City council loves to listen to their people and what it is that they want. Obviously as the shelter director or rescue director, your voice matters, of course, but sometimes when you have a large number of just like general public people who suddenly care about an issue, it kind of makes them care a little bit more too, and kind of think like, how can I actually help this organization? So don't discount your residents. And then another note is schools. Get kids involved, because then the adults support. They were talking more in like a fundraising sense, but I think this is like applicable across the board. But for them, they had a student fundraiser, and basically the kids, I don't know, they did some artwork or something like that, and then they did a silent auction for all of the art pieces. Anyways, I think she said they raised like $16,000 or $14,000, I don't know, something like that. It was a crazy amount of money for like kids art. But like people like actually wanted it. Like normally when you do these kinds of fundraisers, if you've ever done any of these types of fundraisers, usually people don't actually want the item. They'll just be like, oh, just keep it and I'll send you the money kind of thing. But no, people actually wanted their artwork. They said like, no, I'm paying $2,000 for this. Like I want you to send me my art. So anyways, that's pretty cool that like people actually cared and they were actually invested and they weren't just donating to get her to shut up, you know? Oh, I lied. I have one last note. So have workflows for yourself. And this is in all aspects, because especially if you're kind of like me and you're doing multiple roles, you know, when something happens, who do I tell? Like, do I need to tell our partners at city council? Do I need to tell our partner vet? Do I need to tell some of the businesses that we partnered with? Do I need to do a press release and tell the general public and just like everybody in our community? Like, who do I need to tell? At what point do I need to tell them? Because sometimes you tell city council things before you tell other people things, or like your vet, you need to tell them certain things before you release it to the public. So when do I tell them? And then how can we leverage it? So they were kind of talking about doing like complimentary stories. And obviously this isn't going to work for every single case, but when you can, it does make sense. But for example, they had an animal cruelty case, and once he was charged, by the way, it took 3 years to get from animal seizure to conviction. So a very, very long time. And in that 3 years, these dogs were already adopted up in, I think she said, Colorado. So when he got convicted, it was front page news, and at the top it said like animal cruelty conviction. But then what the rescue did is they did a complimentary article right next to it or below it or whatever, and it was all about how they survived this really terrible situation, but how they're now living their best lives in Colorado, and like all these pictures of them being happy and whatever. So that's a complimentary story that really is done well. You know, it's not just showing a happy ending, but it's also showing like, you know, our organization stepped up and we made this happen. And honestly, in animal rescue, that's kind of what you need to do to gain legitimacy and to gain community support. So anyways, leveraging it in whatever way you can. Oh my gosh, I lied again. I have one more note. This one was more like a mental note. I guess I was just gonna say, the reason I took this class is because I know one of the speakers is very well known for moving her dogs in a very rural setting all the way up to Oregon and Washington, because, you know, animal laws are better up there, people treat their dogs better up there, adoptions are much smoother up there, and so she sends her dogs up there all the time. So I was kind of hoping that she would speak to that point. She didn't. So if anybody has tips, we have transport already available. We have pilots willing to partner with us, and we also have ground transport, if obviously not all the way to Washington or Oregon, but we've done transports to Colorado and stuff. So we do have ground transport. We have pilots willing to work with us, but we don't have rescues willing to accept. So if anybody has tips, I've sent emails, I've tried calling. Everybody already kind of has their partner set, but I don't know. If anybody has some miracle out there for me, I'm all ears. Okay, now we're gonna move on to coalitions. So for this class, honestly, I don't have too many notes. To be honest, a lot of this stuff I kind of already knew. I've been working quite a bit in legislation, so hopefully it's not too like high level, but I guess first thing we need to know is micro versus macro. So micro is going to be city, sometimes state, just kind of depends. And then macro is going to be state and federal. When it comes to building coalitions, do not discriminate. You want to partner with anybody and everybody, even if you feel like it might be an unlikely ally. So, you know, partner with law enforcement and transport groups and vets and nonprofits and for-profits, even breeders. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but I've heard a lot of situations in like the breeding world. You know, sometimes when breeding gets outlawed altogether, then you have people going underground and doing it way worse than having regulated breeding. So sometimes it's better to regulate something and at least you know for a fact that people are doing it the right way than to just ban it completely and then you have people trying to be sneaky about it and now the dogs are in a worse position than they ever would have been. So in that case, partnering or building you don't have to partner, building a coalition with a breeder, a responsible breeder might make sense. I know they do it with like fur farms and stuff like that, especially like international cases. Sometimes they'll partner with people who do things the more humane way, simply because it means that they're able to regulate things a little bit better when you have the good guys on your side. Anyways, I know it's counterintuitive, but just don't turn partnerships away. Sometimes the most unlikely of allies really turn out to be like your biggest champions. Another tip, obviously this is like a shameless plug, but connect with Humane World state directors. This is a Humane World event, so you know, again, kind of a shameless plug there, but they do have state directors almost in every state. I thought they had it in every state, but they don't. Apparently neither of the Dakotas have one. I don't know about other places, but that was one that somebody had asked, are you guys in North or South Dakota? And they're like, neither. So fun fact. With that being said, when you do connect with them, don't act like you have everything figured out. With anybody that you reach out to, you have to be vulnerable and you have to ask for help and you have to be legitimate about the things that you can do and the things that you can't do. And then also ask others in your community. I feel like that should go without saying, but if you have local vets who kind of share your mission, or other rescues, other shelters, anybody who shares your mission, try to see if you can build a coalition with them. It just makes sense. Like if you're able to reach a goal by working together, why not? Another thing, so you have to have consistent messaging. I'm sure this one sounds obvious, but the thing is that in coalitions, a lot of times the organizations involved don't like each other, or have like fundamental value differences, and that's okay. In fact, it should make you guys stronger as long as you guys can set clear rules and boundaries and have consistent messaging all the way through. Like, this is our goal, and despite our feelings on each other or our feelings on how we should get to that goal, our goal remains the same. So let's stick with that. So yeah, sometimes you don't agree with your partners, but you need to get to the goal, and that requires consistent messaging and reduced confusion from the public. We want everybody in the coalition, in the public, everybody needs to be on the same page about what it is that you're asking for. And then you need to think about what each person can contribute. So let's say it's us. We need to talk about what are our surpluses. So at this exact moment, I would say our pet food pantry is going well. If some organization needs 10 bags of dog food tomorrow, like that's something that we could provide. And you know, in our area, a lot of rescues do, like they're like, we're out of food, like we need help. So that is something that I know for a fact that we could help with. And then where are our gaps? Kind of already mentioned it, but with adoptions, if we can't get them adopted out here, we really need to get them on transport up north where they have a much better chance of being adopted. So I would say our gap is adoptions. And then you need to figure out what the other organization is. So like I mentioned, there's one organization in particular who they have a lot of transports, but they are always asking for food on social media. So if we can build a coalition with them and kind of build this partnership, and then now, you know, obviously, eventually we want this to progress into something that we can turn into policy, but at least on this basic level to build trust. I think us being able to offer them food because it's a surplus for us, and them being able to offer us transport because it's a surplus for them, it's really addressing both of our needs, and now we're able to work a little bit more efficiently because we have the resources that we need. And then the last note here is transparency is key, but if you guys have been watching our page for a while, you already know that's how I feel, so totally agree there. Anyways, today was a good day. Also, I don't have my award with me, but anyways, I won a Trailblazer in animal welfare. I got my certificate tonight and we had like a nice ceremony and stuff, so I'm happy, I'm proud. But anyways, that was my recap of today. I think tomorrow is a very long day as well, and then Friday's a half day, so I will see you for 2 more days.